Hello students. This video lecture is going to be on the second biomolecule, lipids. Last time we discussed carbohydrates. If you recall, we broke it down to what is the building block or the monomer of a carbohydrate and how it joins together to make larger carbohydrates. The building block was the monosaccharides, then it went to disaccharides, polysaccharides. Today we're going to be talking about lipids, which is another component in the structure of living things. A lot of times people use lipids and fat interchangeably. That's not actually biologically correct, but you'll start seeing that fat and oils is one type of lipid. So lipids as a whole, and we're not going to talk about all the different types of lipids, are categorized by being large molecules that are nonpolar or insoluble in water. So what we mean by nonpolar is that they don't interact with molecules that are polar, such as water. If you recall in our basic chemistry video lecture, I showed you how a molecule of water, which was one oxygen and two hydrogens, was produced by polar covalent bonds because the electrons were not shared equally, which gives a molecule polarity, a region that is slightly negative and a region that is slightly positive, right? So when polar molecules are around each other, they interact. Their negative and positive poles of other ones combine because opposite charges attract. Whereas when we have a molecule that's non-polar, that doesn't have poles, it has no difference in charge around it. So it won't interact or dissolve in things like water that is polar. So lipids as a whole are non-polar and therefore insoluble. Insoluble means they don't dissolve in water. They function in living things largely as long-term energy storage and heat retention, meaning like insulation. They also have other functions like steroids, which are many sex hormones, but we're not really going to get into those today. So here are some varieties of lipids you may know about. Fats and oils are a type of lipid. Phospholipids are the lipids that make up the cell membrane. Steroids are some that you may know about are like the sex hormones. Testosterone is a steroid. And waxes, right? If you think about wax, it's non-polar. It doesn't dissolve in water. If you think about fat and oil, if you put it in water, it doesn't mix. Again, here are some different types of lipids that I just talked about. We will be covering fats and oils and phospholipids. We won't be covering steroids and waxes, but those are other types. Going back to this table that I brought up when I talked about carbohydrates, recall carbohydrates is the category of biomolecule. The monomer is a monosaccharide. The polymer is a polysaccharide. Now we're moving down to lipids. The building blocks or the subunits of lipids are glycerol and fatty acids. So it's two different molecules. It doesn't fit as nicely as the carbohydrates, and glycerol and fatty acids will join together to make a larger molecule like triglycerides and phospholipids. So we're going to start first with triglycerides. So triglyceride is the larger lipid, and it's going to be made up of the subunits, the building block. A common term that people use to talk about triglycerides are fats and oils. Both fats and oils function in living things to store energy. So if you have a lot of fat on your body, you could use that fat as energy. So even if you didn't eat for a long time, your body would break that fat down and use it for energy. So that's how your body stores excess energy. Oil is the same thing. Now, the difference with fats and oils is where they're derived, and we'll talk about this. Fats are usually animal-derived, and oils are plant-derived. Now we're going to go to the structure of a triglyceride. So really, we're just doing the synthesis. I'm going to talk about how they're made. We're not going to really talk about how they're degraded, broken down. So remember, what are the building blocks of lipids? Glycerol and fatty acids. So those are the building blocks. one glycerol molecule joins 3 fatty acids. So these, look at this structure, these carbon chains. Notice there's very little oxygen in these chains. That's one reason they're nonpolar. And these 3 chains will join together with this glycerol to make a triglyceride. Tri means 3 because there are 3 fatty acid chains. Phospholipids are a second type of lipid, and the phospholipids are the component of the cell membrane, which we'll talk a lot about in our next molecule. All right, so we just talked about triglycerides. Those were fats and oils. Fats were animal-derived, oils are plant-derived. Now we're going to talk about phospholipids. So phospholipids, the structure is very similar to triglycerides. It's one glycerol, just as in a triglyceride, but now instead of 3 fatty acids for a phospholipid, there are only 2 fatty acids. In addition, there is a phosphate group by the glycerol that has a charge, that has a negative charge that's going to become important. Those fatty acid tails, remember they were those carbon-hydrogen chains, are nonpolar and hydrophobic, but that phosphate group on the head gives that molecule polarity. It has that negative charge, and it functions as a... Here's the picture of the phospholipid. I'm going to try to get my pointer working. Here's the head. You don't have to know what all these are, but this is what we refer to as the glycerol group. This head is polar, it interacts with water, and these are the fatty acid tails or chains. And so we say that the building block of lipids are like fatty acids because triglycerides have them, so do phospholipids. And these tails are nonpolar, meaning that they don't interact with water. So if you put phospholipids into water, they will automatically form what's called a bilayer. And that's the picture in the square here. So the tails will automatically move towards each other because they want to be away from the water, and the heads that interact with water will stay facing the outside. See, it says outside of a cell and inside a cell because those solutions have water in them. So this makes up the cell membrane, along with there's proteins in it, but this is the majority of the cell membrane. All right, so that covers lipids. The amount that I want to talk about it. So as a group, they're mostly nonpolar. They don't mix with water. The building blocks are fatty acids. We talked about triglycerides. Examples of those are fats and oils. And then we talked about phospholipids, which are the main building block of cell membranes.